AdLib is the DSP-agnostic buying platform to scale your programmatic campaigns smarter, faster, and more profitably. AdLib helps independent agencies and marketers deliver premium programmatic performance without the complexity, cost, or overhead of traditional DSPs. Their platform provides the tools, data, and automation to run enterprise-quality campaigns, from CTV and audio to geofencing and YouTube, all under one roof with zero trafficking headaches. Plus, they're not just a platform, they're your growth partner. The AdLib team helps you win new business, expand budgets, and deliver measurable ROI that keeps clients coming back. It's time to unlock programmatic. Join leading marketers worldwide who are using AdLib to deliver more campaigns with better results. Check out getadlib.com. Welcome to Open Market, a podcast about building companies in the advertising industry. I'm Joe Zappa. I'm joined by Franchi and the illustrious Corey Ferengul. How's it going, Corey?
All right. Sorry you got a slum today. So,
when was the last time you were called illustrious, Car?
yeah, I don't know that I've ever heard that. So I'm processing still.
For those unfamiliar, Corey works with me at Aperiam. We go back, way back. Corey was CEO at Undertone, was acquired by Aperiam, has done a bunch of awesome stuff in the space. And at times we like to bring Corey on to talk about things that he is uniquely suited for, which is operating at scale. So is that the subject for today, Joe?
Yes, and sort of how you get there and the different CEO personas that can take you on that journey.
Amazing.
So, Corey, we corresponded a little bit before this, and you were taking me through the different CEO personas. And what I thought we could do is, first, let's run through the different CEO archetypes as you see them as a serial CEO and board member yourself. And then let's talk about the different stages of a tech company. And you can talk about how those personas change as you move through the stages.
It is so stage dependent, right? In terms of which ones, but there's a few that kind of apply, right? And so what do we mean by that is kind of what's that background, what's that personality of the CEO, right? Where do they spend their time? Where do they get their energies? And we talk about these archetypes. And I think, first one is really the sales, right? So it's a sales leader. This is a salesperson in charge. They're going to lean much more market focused. They're going to be much more customer centric. They're going to be someone who spends most of their time out of the office closing deals, even though they're, the CEO, they're not in the company. They view running the company as they have the biggest quota. And by the way, very appreciated and liked by a lot of VCs, especially growth equity VCs, where they just want to see, the company's just growing like crazy and they want to see their top person in the field closing business, And by the way, you will usually find that person was a salesperson, right? And they evolved into the senior leadership. So that's one. And that one, you see that across company sizes until you get to the, the really, really large publics. Then you've got kind of the product. And there's a little blend between the next two, product or CTO. And the reason you separate them is the product archetype, which is actually where I grew up. I was a product manager. I was a product visionary. I was always defining product. And that type of CEO is one who's thinking about market and market shifts and what product goes where and what should we build and kind of putting those pieces together, which is a little different than the CTO who's coming at it from a technology view up, right? And so quite bluntly, Google is a technology driven one. They were technologists. They were building a better mousetrap, right? You had Meta, it was a technology driven CEO and a CTO in a CEO role. And they were building tech. And what you find a lot with the CTO driven is they're building tech for the sake of tech and they're getting tech out there and they're doing great tech stuff. They're not always iterating in the customer feedback and stuff like they're building tech, man. And it showed a little bit with how long Facebook went without generating revenue, right? It was like more tech, more usage. Look at our metrics. This is great. More tech, more usage. To where that product CEO is going to be a little bit more feature function, customer value. What are we doing there? Then you've got the role that I call the visionary. And I actually think Sam Altman kind of fits into this persona, which is, I'm thinking really big picture. Yeah. That's the thing we're delivering today. But we're solving these this massive changing problem, right? We're going to deliver and this is the path to get there. But these tend to be the ones that are, I'll call it a little more separated from the organization, so to speak, and a lot more on trying to change the world. And we're going to drive this really big picture. Then you've got a couple of other personas. The operator. This is the person who's here to put in some good processes, get us efficient. A lot of times that's associated with make us profitable, get them in the door. And then another persona that sometimes is the operator, but often is not, is the CFO. We're going to put a finance person in charge. someone there. So you got your sales, product, CTO, that visionary, operator, and CFO are kind of the personas that I see broadly across all stages, right? And apply differently at different stages.
Yeah, that's a great breakdown. So take us through, let's go through the personas one by one and talk about how they end up in the CEO role, what it looks like at the different stages. Like when you were describing the sales archetype, I was immediately thinking, oh, that's interesting. Like, how do they usually make that transition from a great salesperson to a CEO, whether it's founding their own company or sort of joining another company? And so why don't you take us through the sales persona first?
Yeah. When I see a sales persona in an early stage company, call that, that 0 to 10 million in revenue. Usually that means there was a tech person, there was an engineer that needed somebody, and they found that person, they made him CEO, right? And they're like, good, I don't want to run it. I don't want to be out front. I'm happy back here building some good stuff. You go figure it out. That's, really common in that earlier stage. But it really depends on the stage of company as to why that CEO stepped in. So earlier stage, it's typically they partnered up with somebody. You'll typically see co-founders then, and then they took the lead, or they had an idea and they're trying to figure out how to piece it together and trying to pull people together and do a deal, right? And we're going to get some people in the door. We're going to build this product and so on. As you go a little bit further down the line, it more times than not is the investors that lean to a sales person. They're saying, oh, we got to ignite, I saw a note from a board member the other day that said, we have to ignite growth in this business. They're going to usually look for a sales-oriented CEO, right? It's what they're going to go for. So, pretty common if it's not the founder, that sales CEO is, because the board wants to see more sales. And often they're looking for someone who's had a really broad remit and they're taking a step back, meaning they ran a $150 million sales organization and they maybe had a little bit more, broad of a responsibility than that. They also ran marketing and they also ran some other things. And now they're going to go down and run a $15 or $20 million company. Okay, you take that step back to step up. Once you get to that $100 million, plus kind of size of company, it's purely based on their ability to cut deals and bigger deals. Can they be the biggest closer of the biggest deals? But knowing how to actually delegate the sales function. It's one of the challenges of a sales-led CEO is they stay the head of sales and they do the sales work for a while, right? And then eventually they got to bring in a head of sales. They can't do it, right? And run the company.
Yeah. As you move through those stages of company evolution, when does the sales CEO really have to start delegating and building out a sales org and trusting the CRO or a VP of sales and no longer being the main closer, and what sort of difficulties tend to arise at that point?
The number one issue is how much they let go of other functions in the company. Meaning if they try to be very controlling, then they aren't able to hold on to the sales function as long, right? Mm-hmm. I know one CEO who used to sit on, he was very sales-led CEO. He was all about doing deals, but he sat in on all the sprint reviews of engineering, which were long time. And it's many hours, a week that you can't, if you let that go, you have the cycles for it. But really between kind of 10 and 50 million is when they got to start letting go, right? It's going to be small increments and so on. But by 50 million, you need a true head of sales and your CEO is the closer. They're brought in for the biggest deal, but you need to make sure the vast majority of the revenue you closed this year went through a professional sales organization, not through the CEO's hands.
And then how does that evolve at the $100 million level and beyond?
I mean, at the $100 million level and beyond, the CEO is sales centric. They may lean to the sales organization, but they need to have evolved into more of a strategist at that point. All right. When you're over $100 million, it's no longer just rinse and repeat and keep selling the same product. You're going to be adding new products to the mix. You got to lean and figure out what else can I put in the bag of the sales team, right? What else can they sell? They need to be thinking like that, not just deal centric. And when they do deals, it's got to be big transformational company deals, right? Hey, great partnership we're doing here, or landing the largest customer that we've ever had. They can't be in the nitty gritty of every deal and every renewal and all that good stuff. They've got to be thinking transformation, driving bigger stuff.
So I'm guessing that a great sales driven CEO, what makes them great as the company evolves is they are able to evolve themselves from I'm going after and closing all these deals to I'm building a great team around me. I'm letting go of different functions, et cetera. And like a CEO who might struggle a little more it turns out maybe they're more of a salesperson than a true CEO.
And I'd say it's the characteristic of all of these CEOs. As the company scales, you let go of what you came from more and more. When I took over as CEO of Undertone, we hired a new head of product. I was running product at Undertone, and I went to him and I said, I'm your biggest problem, because that used to be my job, right? And I was like, so we got to work through this, because I know I can't do it, but I know I'm going to try, so like, how do we do that, right? They've got to let go of that as the company scales up, and they've got to think broader, and they've got to default less and less to what they came from and more to the bigger picture. The interesting thing is, though, these personas also create a different culture in the organization. I mean, Eric, at Undertone, when I arrived, you guys had created a very sales-centric culture in the organization. And,
Mike and I were salespeople.
Right. And by the way, it showed also in the fact that engineering was literally not in the same city as the bulk of the organization, right? It was separate. It was a very sales-centric culture.
Nobody told us otherwise. Yeah, we didn't know.
And it worked great. And it's not bad. It's not good or bad. It's just what it is, right? It's just the angle, right?
Yeah. With the benefit of a lot of years and a lot of experience, for certain, perhaps we would have taken a different path, but that's just what it was. And I think we're a very good example of one of those archetypes, just like the first one specifically.
And look, in a sales-centric culture, sales takes the lead, right? When salespeople come in with some new needs, product tends to have to react. Product and engineering tend to have to react. Innovation kind of comes from feedback from the field as opposed bottom up out of engineering. There's a lot more rewards and celebration of salespeople than there are of celebrating kind of the other functions, right? So that's, more sales-centric orgs that's who's on top of the food chain internally.
Yeah. That's what you walked into. If I get back, like that's literally what you walked into. And frankly, that was something that we needed to dial back and get a little bit more towards a more balanced culture. And that's where I give you a ton of credit, Corey, because we were absolutely way skewed to the opposite end of it, down to, we'd love to have Mike on for some sort of retrospective, like hard to let go of some of the sales responsibilities, because again, it's just like what we knew.
It's what you know, right? You felt way more comfortable sitting in a pipeline review than you did sitting in a code review.
Right? Or better, yeah, just sitting in front of customers, right?
Right, exactly. So that was, and I know, Mike, we're talking Mike Cassidy, who was Eric's co-founder at Undertow. Mike was much more comfortable planning a customer strategy than a product roadmap.
Yeah.
So
that was the archetype.
When do you need to switch CEO archetypes? Are there companies, and obviously it seems like Undertone was one such case, where you start with a sales CEO and then at a certain point you need to have a product CEO?
Or at a certain point, that person needs to evolve to lean less that way. Mm-hmm. It's not about stage of company. It's about what the company needs at the moment. Undertone, we hit an inflection point where we were a lot of desktop display and we needed to shift, right? And that was going to be a product-led initiative, not a sales-led initiative. And so it was the right inflection point where that shift worked there. 2 years earlier, that shift wouldn't work there. It wasn't the right time. It wasn't the market. It was really a window, a timing. That's actually what good boards do, is they recognize that, this is the skill this company needs at this moment, as opposed to, we're $50 million. At $50 million, we need a CTO type. They tend not. It's really situational. So product, yeah. So the next archetype then on the product CEO. So and I think we've probably all seen this before, right? I'm a product person, product management. I'm familiar with how products are designed, and they thought about it, and I have had an idea for years. I know I want to build this, right? You go find somebody to help build it because you're not necessarily an engineer, but you are out there pitching the value and this is what it's going to do, but you really don't love being in market. So you're going to typically bring in a salesperson pretty early on. You can close the first few deals, but that's with some friends of yours, right? But you're going to probably get somebody in the door pretty early, to start getting the sales, and then you're going to seek the feedback from them, and you want to go to sales calls, but you don't get a lot of joy out of setting up those meetings and all that good stuff. You do like pitching, you do like getting the feedback because you want to take it back and develop the product. And then you tend to kind of figure out, where is this product going to go? A product centric founder tends to start with a problem they're solving and try and put a product into the problem.
I was going to say, this is the founder who comes on the pod and they're like, it just really bothered me that this didn't exist.
Yes.
There's a gap in the market and they're like, this needs to exist. Yeah,
exactly. A product CEO can evolve. They have to do more in sales. I mean, that was my first learning. As a matter of fact, when I transitioned it from running, I ran product marketing and a number of other functions. The sales team, it was my roughest meeting. on the transition was with the sales org, because they were like, oh, dude, and my statement to them was, if you fail, I fail. Let's remember our fates are intertwined. And they're like, what? It was like, yeah, this is, I'm not here to make this a, product only company. I'm here to succeed as a company. Sales has got to succeed. And that was the learning for me. That was actually, I wasn't smart enough to have figured that out. I talked to a lot of people who were like, yeah, you got to right away win sales over. You got to lean in, start attending pipeline meetings, start leaning into sales. That's where a product-led CEO has got to evolve into that.
Corey, with the rapid evolving of capabilities with AI, do you think we're going to see more or less product archetype CEOs in the future?
More.
Because it's so easy to spin out products. Interesting.
Bingo. Yeah. And I think CTO type as well, right? I think we see a lot. As a matter of fact, Eric, and if I look at what we look at Aperiam, I think we see more CTO archetype founders. I was just on with a CEO of a company this morning. It's not in the ad tech world, but it's using AI. He's a product guy. He's got someone to build this thing for him. He's, running 1 million miles an hour. Like, he's exactly that. And an AI is just accelerating the hell out of his ability to solve this problem. Right. So yeah, it just lowers the barrier. The number one fear for most product-led CEOs is they can't code. They're not software engineers. So like, ooh, how do I find someone to do it? Well, I just lowered that barrier. So it opens the door to more of them.
Now, from what I understand from technical people, it's like those products will be a version of something that needs to be fixed by an engineer.
Yes.
But it is like lowering the barrier to entry for non.
Yeah, you can't vibe code the enterprise, damn it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the CTO becomes a 10x CTO. So it's like, my goodness, did this person, churn out that much more at that much of a, kind of higher quality with a leader team and just operate faster. So I get where Corey's coming from. But I also get where you're coming from, Joe, which is just like, hey, at some point, if you just want to go 0 to 1, you probably don't need the technical infrastructure that you needed a couple of years ago.
I recently talked to a senior software engineer who was the founding engineer for 2 other companies whose boards I was on. And I always check in with him because he's never going to be more than a team lead engineer. It's all he wants to be. He's happy. That's his world. And I said, what's Claude Code doing for you? Right? Massive release in February and stuff. And he said that he doesn't code anymore. His morning is prompting and his afternoon is reviewing code. And he said he's got 7 full-time agents running. Half of the code is crap. Half of it isn't releasable, but half of it is. He's like, so I'm getting 4 or so people's worth of work on a daily basis, and it's only going to get better. And I'm only going to spit up more agents, right? And so he's just like, this will be the greatest thing, but I can't release anything it finishes. I have to review it all. But it's way quicker to review code than to think about it and start from scratch, right? That's where, as you start linking into the CTO persona, like that's where a lot of them come from. Where Eric and I are constantly talking to companies and screening them as screening a company. And, as CTO guy, and they're trying to solve a problem. And I was like, well, do you understand that this is how others are solving it? And did you understand that the buyers buy in this way? And he was like, oh, but the technology is so much better. It's like, yeah, but you got to think about that other part too, right? I'm finding that it makes the CTO more liberated. Like, I could just build it. It's not going to take me forever. I can just build something and get it out there and let's go. So just like the product person, it lowers the barrier. It lowers the barrier for the engineering person too. They can build a MVP quickly.
So I think you were saying, Corey, when we were talking before the app, that the CTO persona, they struggle a bit usually as the company grows. Like you said, from 10 to 50 million, it's rarer that persona is able to remain in the CEO role unless they really develop other expertise.
That's right. And people will hold up, Zuckerberg, or people will hold up the Google team. And then anybody who paid any attention is like, oh, Sheryl Sandberg came in and that's what really happened. While he held the CEO title, he remained CTO, right? Eric Schmidt came into Google, and it wasn't just Eric Schmidt. There was some actual other people that came along the way into Google that turned this cool idea into AdWords. AdWords, what didn't come out of the core founding team, it came out of people they brought in, right? So the CTO can scale it all the way up when they are smart enough to let go and let other people handle that go-to-market and double down. And you can't be technology for the sake of technology. That's where I see most CTO founders fail, is they keep building, and not clear enough on what of what they're building is monetizable, is truly market desired, right? But they fail when they think they're smarter than everybody else, even though the dollars aren't proving it, right?
And then at a certain point, even if they remain in that CEO role and they sort of retain their CTO disposition, they're going to transform into a visionary, right? Where it's like they're not going to be coding, they're going to be setting the direction.
Zuckerberg being the perfect example, right? He spends his time now thinking about what the metaverse, now defunct metaverse, but like what's going to happen next, right? So we had sales, product, CTO. So then you get the visionary. And the reason I say Sam Altman is Sam doesn't code. Sam's really not a product guy, but Sam's out there talking about how is AI going to change the universe, right? And leading from high upon.
He can raise money like nobody's business.
Visionaries can raise money like nobody's business, right? They are getting people excited. Visionaries are the worst operators of every one of these archetypes, right? But everybody loves them. Like, oh, did you hear that person? Like, she was amazing. I totally see the vision. And then you start getting short on and usually they're the ones they'll give that pitch and then they'll turn it over to somebody else to actually give the details, right? They're like, yeah, oh, look how amazing this is. Yeah, Joe over here is going to tell you what's going on, and then, Jane's going to tell you this, but it's, the visionary is painting that massive big picture. I think about early days of crypto and actually some of the Coinbase stuff, like they were, talking crypto is going to change everything like this. Oh yeah. We're building exchange. We're going to start there, but wait till you see in the new coin, and it's like, and then people are going to go public with coin offerings and we're going to have that, massive vision. Product is a means to the end. It's not where they're trying to get.
Now, it seems to me that what's really interesting about the visionary archetype is like the vision has to be big, right? And like visionaries, they deal in big, right? That's kind of their whole thing. But it's like the reason Sam Altman, that model works so well for him is he's literally operating at like the largest possible scale. So large that even when like ChatGPT skyrocketed in success, to your point about the difference between a product and a visionary CEO, you could always tell Sam Altman was kind of like, yeah, ChatGPT is cool. It's one of like the cool things we're doing. Whereas for like anyone else, right, that would be like, well, we did the biggest thing we could have possibly done. But it's like, this is just one thing we're doing. And there are going to be other things.
Is it the fastest from $0 to $1 billion of revenue in recorded software history? And he was like, yeah, but right.
Exactly. And so, but it doesn't work if it's not huge because it has to be huge to then attract all of the capital and talent required to do all of those other things.
I'll say, and Eric, you've got even a better sense on the founder views, but like you get on a call and you can tell you've got a visionary founder pretty quickly, right? And there's some in our portfolio that you talk to them, you're like, oh, this individual's this is a visionary one, right? It's rare. We don't see it as much because they're not trying to change the world. They're trying to build a product. They're trying to solve they're the product guy trying to solve a problem. They're an engineer who I've looked at that other product. It was so badly, so inefficient. I can make it more efficient. Like you see it quickly, but you just see it more rarely.
Yeah. You know it when you see it because it's intoxicating and you're like being taken on a journey and oh my goodness, like I'm actually believing this stuff. But you're right. It's a very small percentage of the time.
It's, as an investor, hard to then go, am I getting caught up in this person's going to be great at pitching. They're going to be great at painting a vision. Is this real? Could it be, is this really investable? Is there, how many miracles need to happen to get a return on this investment, right? Yeah. But I will tell you, inside a visionary company, hardest thing in the world inside that organization, because that is going to be the most poorly put together operations. That's going to be, a person going, yeah, just get this done. And you're like, just get this done means these 10, don't. They're the ones most likely to say, we're being slowed down.
Yeah, roadmap changes, every week, and we've all heard the stories.
Yeah, I've lived them. Quite a few who lived. So, yeah,
everyone's been there. Yeah, the visionary CEO is the one who externally people freaking love the visionary CEO. Yeah, they're like, this guy is so smart and like, and as you said, intoxicating. Like when he talks, I'm all about it. But then you talk to their staff.
Bingo.
And their staff is like, this guy changed his entire idea for the company over the weekend, and we're like scrambling.
I mean, my favorite is the customer meeting. I was at a customer meeting. We need to do this. I just lost, and the problem is they're rooting it in real market opportunity, but you're just, like an example of this. I was involved with one company where nobody in the engineering team wanted to commit to the product roadmap. And why? It's going to change. It's going to change. What's his schedule? He's going out when? It's going to change. So a visionary CEO, wildly successful at raising money, but need to double down on strong operators below them and need to do that early. The earlier, the better.
And need to trust those people and sometimes defer, right? Because I think the other thing I've seen with that archetype, like I deal with this from the marketing perspective where I'm dealing with a marketing team and they're like, they say the exact same thing, Corey. They're like, well, we could push this message out, but the product we're selling could be different in 3 weeks. So I don't know. So they kind of need a partner who's going to like rein them in and structure them, right?
Yep.
Yeah, the best examples of this working just came to mind, Joe, where it's just like immediately I thought about, a visionary who has like strong number two, and strong number two helps to drive it through the organization.
Yeah, exactly. And they let go of it and trust them. And they have to be self-aware that they're a visionary and therefore they know they wreak havoc on the org and recognize it and therefore say, hey, I know I wreak havoc. I know I'm bringing tons of ideas. It's got to fit in the process, right? That's where you see them succeeding.
Yeah, you don't get that until there's a certain level of experience and maturity.
That's exactly right.
Where do you think Steve Jobs would fit in your archetype matrix, Corey?
I think Steve Jobs is a visionary product person.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right. Came out of the product side and evolved into the visionary.
Oh, okay. Involved into because I was thinking he obviously would straddle like product and visionary. So it's interesting to think about that.
But if you look, he really started out as product. Well, okay, but think about it. The iPod was a means to an end. He had 4 other iterations on it, right? The phone and then the store and then the pad and so on, right? So he had that kind of visionary, like, yeah, but wait till you see what's next. I know some people that worked at Apple in that, 2000 to 2010 range, which was, you go back and look, an insane amount of innovation coming out of that company in that period. And they were like, he was never happy after those launches because he wanted the next 3 things launched. Right. So he went from being a product guy and let's get an iMac out, when he came back and so on, or let's get the first Mac out and then we're going to do a better product. And he evolved into, no, I see where the end is going to be, but I got to get through some stages to get there. And that's just massive growth in him.
Yeah, don't mean to sidebar, but it's fascinating. Apple post Steve Jobs, like the AirPods, have been just an amazing, kind of world-changing product, but there really hasn't been anything besides the AirPods, right? And
who did they put in charge? What persona?
An operator.
Absolute operator. That's such a great point. Such a great point. Some of the hallmarks of Steve from a product standpoint is they say if you were able to like open up any Apple device, when they're super hard to do so, by the way, but if you do it, they're as like kind of clean and pristine and beautifully organized on the inside as they are on the outside. The last iterations of products that Steve had his fingerprints on before he passed, they no longer had the power button. It's like he was obsessed with that one, just like, kind of symbolized, sort of like the eternity that an Apple product should have. But at the same time, if you watch some of those old YouTube videos, that guy could have an entire stadium just engrossed in believing anything he said and eating out of the palm of his hand, as you're doing right now. What a special dude. And by the way, sounds like he was impossible to work for, impossible to be friends with,
a visionary
to be married to, like all of the above.
Yes. And look, this is the problem I had with founders and even somewhat to this day is they all think they had to be Steve Jobs. Well, there was one Steve Jobs for a reason, right? You don't have to be a jerk to your team. You don't have to think you're smarter. My challenge is always that CEO thinks they're the smartest one in the room. Then you did something wrong. You do not want to be the smartest one in the room. You want everybody around you to be smarter. You know how much better you're going to be. And by the way, that's the one the visionary struggles with the most. They struggle with getting smarter people around the room because they're used to being the smartest person.
Elon Musk, what's his archetype?
He's the visionary. He's the CTO visionary, right? He's very much in the code, which we know from X because there's times in which changes were pushed at night, and we found out that Elon pushed code last night. But he's fully evolved into visionary. And I think about the fact that the Boring Company came out of, he was just pissed off about something, and he's like, we got to just go solve it. And but I solved the problem on exhaust over here, so I could use that problem that I solved with Tesla to solve this problem. So he's in that visionary role now. But he was CTO, evolved into visionary.
I think something, Corey, that clearly defines a great visionary CEO is A, obviously they surround themselves with people who can do the other functions, but B, they're willing to drop down into those functions when required, right? They're not so disconnected and in the clouds that they're like unable to go to that level. And I think we've all seen sort of less successful startup CEOs who they operate at that visionary level. They're very charismatic, whatever, but they're just like, they're like unreachable. It's like talking to them is like navigating a chasm, you know, whereas the better ones, they can drop down if they need to.
Yeah. And by the way, we're spending a lot of time on visionary because it's the most alluring. It's the one you want to like. It's the one that gets people the most excited, right? Yeah. And I think it's the one we all wish we were.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Like, let's go through the Mag 7, right? So we talked about Tesla, clearly visionary, but then
let's just take a quick hit of the last two personas first, then let's go back to that, because I think it's a great way up. So look, we got two others and they're a lot quicker. The operator, this is, in touching your thing a little bit, Eric, this is Tim Cook, right? Okay. We need to bring great efficiency to an org. Now, in a much smaller company, you will see that kind of in that $30 to $50 million range at points. When investors think you've got a great product market fit, I just need to get this thing going. I just need to, optimize it. I need to drive to some profitability. Boom, bring in a good operator. This person's going to put your processes in place. They're not going to have an ego about any of the other roles. You could have a great CRO over here and a great CTO over there. Boom, they're the operator. Away they go. And then you get the CFO, and there's a blend. Sometimes it's a CFO operator, but this is, and I see this one a lot in companies in that $100 million plus stage, where it's like, it's all about making sure we get our numbers right. Are we managing to the metrics correctly? Typically a board is like, wait a minute, our gross margin isn't where it should be, and we're missing this, and we're spending too much money on that. Boom, there's your CFO, the need for your CFO type, right? And you will see very large companies, a lot of CFO types in the big companies, because it's all about the metrics, because it's all about what the street wants, right? And they're driving it there.
It's all about what the street wants. And it's also like at a certain level, like 100 million revenue plus, like things start getting abstract to a point where it's like, it's less about like instinct and it's more about, because you can't like, there's some instinct, but you can't possibly like get into everything at that level. So you need to be able to look at data and figure out what's going on and what needs to change.
Yeah, I mean, when I was at Rovi, we were roughly 700 to 800 million in revenue, kind of somewhere in there. No one product was more than like 200 million in revenue, right? And then we had a couple $50 million products. Our ad business was like $75 million and so on. And so our CEO, I ran product engineering strategy. I had that universe. Fred Amoroso is CEO. Fred just, I got to trust that person on this business. And actually Scott Rosenberg, for those that know Scott, was running our ad business. He's like, I just trust Scott. Scott, what do you got? Tell you, but then there was other business. He's like, I got to dig in here. I got to know this one really good and knew when to dive in, right? That's when you get to that size, what do you have to do?
Eric, you were going to take us through the Mag 7.
I think the interesting is what you said, Corey, was like, we all want to be the visionary. But if I think about it, there's maybe no visionaries in the Mag 7, right? Outside of Elon, right? So Elon aside, let's walk through. So Microsoft, you have Satya, who came up through, I think, the product organization. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. So Satya, and he's
a product operator, man. He's a product operator.
It might be the number one, by the way. Right. So you've got Satya. Yeah. Satya, you've got Sundar at Google. Again, similarly, came up with a product organization.
And he's much more product oriented, and he's a little more operator, but he's more product centric, right? And he's on the product side.
Yep. We talked about Tim Cook at Apple, pure operator. You've got Zuckerberg, who's
your CTO. He leans more. He's trying to be more visionary, but to be honest, his visionary stuff hasn't worked. Right? They were going to do their own crypto. They were going to do their own, the metaverse and so on. None of it's paid off. His visionary hasn't worked, but he's trying to be one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he'll just pivot into something and then make it work. Amazon, Andy Jassy, again, came up through the organization, probably a product person, right? Ran AWS.
Yep. He's actually been more ops kind of he's operator. He's all about just how do we get the most efficiency out of the org, right? And by the way, isn't that funny? As we're getting higher up, it's more about efficiency and metrics.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not as much about sales, right? Because sales is so helpful in the beginning when it's like you're brute forcing your way to a certain scale. And then after a certain point, it's like, well, look, any company that reaches a certain level, they should be able to go hire very talented and connected salespeople.
That's right. If I had a company between $50 and $100 million with a sales-led CEO, by the time they get to that 100 million, that person needs to have transitioned out of being sales-centric. Meaning they can't be in the, I mean, there's that's kind of that break point in my mind. After $100 million, they can be a sales-oriented CEO, but they can't live in sales. That's the break.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense to me that you were talking, Corey, about the 0 to 10 million stage, and you were saying the sales persona is the number one persona and probably most loved by investors because at that stage, you're like, can we make this a thing? Do we have someone who can like turn this, hypothetical into a reality? And then it's like, once we have the revenue coming in and we have like, a legitimate product that we have sold, then you start getting into, the operations around it and the technical intricacies and so on.
So it's interesting. If we look at Netflix got the co-CEOs, right? And the co-CEOs come up from two different areas. So, right, Ted Sarandos was really much more of a product. His product was media, but he was a deal guy. He was more of a sales guy with a little bit of product in there. The other, Greg Peters, actually worked for me at Rovi. Greg was a CTO. Greg was one of the best tech guys, and he went over there. Greg actually built the first digital platform at Netflix, like way back in 2007, 2008. And so what did they do there? They actually have two different types. Right? They kind of got that kind of product salesy person, and then they got that CTO person. And so they got kind of the visionary stepped out of the org. And so they didn't just go straight operator. They decided to kind of round it out and those two guys are really complementary in their skill set.
Maybe we can close on this note, just specific to our industry. So advertising and marketing, ad tech and martech. You mentioned a little bit about what you're seeing, but what are you seeing most often? And what do you think there is a need for, or if you feel like people in the space sort of misunderstand some aspect of all of this, what would you say the people need to know?
So look, what I see in, Fortune at Aperiam, we see a lot of companies is we see a lot of product and CTO type archetypes in the initial founding group. And it's not a problem, except the reality is the best technology doesn't always win in this space. And so you really need an emphasis on go-to-market. Got to have a good product. It's zero doubt of that. But go-to-market, that CTO-centric founder, and I talked to one today, very CTO-centric founder, and I started asking about it, selling and explaining things he was missing. And he was like, oh, yeah, like they've got to have an eye to go to market right away and bring in a salesperson right away. That's the only way they're to succeed. And I think if you look at some of the best exits Aperiam has had, it was kind of a CTO product early on, and that's how they found their cool niche. But they doubled down on go-to-market and figured out, because you got to get those agency deals and all that other stuff. It's not just about having great tech. But that's the most common we see, that CTO, product CEO, but they won't succeed if they don't lean into the sales quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you're obviously speaking my language as a commercial person and a marketing hack. But I think, Corey, that it's especially important in ad tech and martech because the reality is a lot of newer companies, they are entering. They're not creating something that's like sui generis, right? It's not wholly new. They're usually entering a crowded existing category with incumbents, and they're coming to people like you and me, and they're saying, this is being done horribly by the incumbents, and I think it could be done better. And we see that especially now in the AI era. And so when you're in those situations, so much of success is predicated on, yeah, you're going to go build a great product and everyone kind of believes you. Like, I think like the people who are in it, we generally believe like it's possible to build a better version of whatever DV and IS are doing, whatever. Yeah. But the question is, okay, to get this done, you got like huge bureaucracies and like freaking holdcos and stuff. And you got publishers who have been beaten down by digital in the last 10 years and like are really resistant to new technology. And you got to get them to sign on to this. So do you have the sales chops, the message, the relationships, the distribution required to get over those hurdles? And if you do, you're going to have a shot. And that's where, yeah, I would agree that I also see there's often a lack of focus on that in our industry.
This is an advertisement for Joe Zappa.
That's right. But I kept it implicit and very classy is what the people are saying. Corey, thank you very much for coming on and sharing your wisdom with us as always. You are always illustrious in my eyes. Have a great weekend.
Talk to you.